Hi everybody, this is Ayushi from Gallery Ark. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting now. Um, just wanted to say good evening and thank you for joining us today for our talk by Madhu Ramnath as a part of our ongoing show In the Light of by Gitanjali Dang. Before we begin the program, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Gallery Ark and its programming. Gallery Ark was founded in 2017 in Vadodara as a result of a passionate drive of Seema and Atul Dalmia to to platform and champion the arts in the city. The gallery is currently headed by Nupur Dalmia, who in the years since her joining has shaped and expanded the gallery programming to grow beyond art exhibitions. The gallery programming includes several events like today's online talk that aims to broaden the dialogue around the arts. Since 2017, Gallery Ark has hosted around 16 shows and several outreach programs in association with the Ruberman Foundation. Our current show, In the Light of, curated by Gitanjali Dang, takes off from a story of two artist friends visiting Fatehpur Sikri, taking near identical photographs and a confabulation of that story. The show explores several other themes that are all tied in together through its curation. Without taking any more of your time, I'd like to welcome our curator, Gitanjali Dang, who will be introducing the happenings and this event's evening speaker, Madhu. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us this evening. Just to quickly tell you a bit about what we're doing here. This is the second episode of the happenings, and this is the first of the second episode of our happenings. The happenings are sort of are imagined as they sort of sprout through the timeline of the exhibitions in the form of talks, film screenings, and performances. And they are very much positioned as artworks within the exhibition, except they have a sort of a different temporality. For today, we have with us Madhu Ramnath. Madhu will be speaking on the subject of wild foods, language, and indigenous identity. Allow me to introduce Madhu. Madhu sent across a bio, which is as follows, a modest bio, and it says, Madhu is a student of Adivasi languages and Adivasi botany and has pursued these fields for the past 40 years. At present, he's working on forest foods. I, of course, have no understanding of the word modest, and so I have put together a slightly a bio that is slightly sort of more detailed and gives credit where it's due. So here goes. Madhu Ramnath has 3 decades of lived experience in the East Central Indian forests of Bastar, where he lived with the Durva Adivasi. Before being a student of Adivasi language and Adivasi botany, he trained to be a them and in his own is a self-taught anthropologist. He is the author of Wood Smoke and Leaf Cups, autobiographical footnotes to the anthropology of the Durva, which was published in 2015, and has co-authored with Ramon Razal, Wild Tastes in Asia, Coming Home to the Forest for Food. And this was just published last year. As part of his ongoing engagement with wild foods, Madhu is of the Non-Timber Forest Products NTFP Exchange Program, which is a network across Asia, aiming to empower people to manage their natural resources while respecting the integrity of cultural traditions. He currently divides his time between the forests of Bastar and Adukam, a small village in Palni Hills, 25 kilometers. I've been told I have frozen, so I will switch off video. Okay, I hope that's better. Coming back, he currently divides his time between the forests of Bastar and Adukam, a small village in the Palni Hills, 25 kilometers from Kodaikanal. We are extremely thrilled that he has made time for this despite his busy travel schedule. In fact, even for the purpose of this talk, he's had to position himself in Kodi, where internet gods are more benevolent. And Madhu, please take it away.
Thank you, Gitanjali, for this introduction. I'm Madhu Ramnath, and I'm glad that I've got an opportunity to share some of my thoughts and a part of my journey. And I thank the organizers of happenings and also of Gallery Ark. I hope the internet holds through this hour or whatever it takes to wind up. So I will start with where Gitanjali left off, which is I spent a lot of time, about 30 years in Bastar. Bastar is a district now in Chhattisgarh, central India. And I went there to understand what the forests and Adivasis are about. I was very curious then. And I had trained myself in classical Linnaean botany, thinking that that would be enough to understand plants, to understand the forest. But when I went there and looked at the forest and used all the books one knows about exist in botany, I find that they were, very, very inadequate to understand plants. One of the main reasons for this is that botanists write for botanists. They don't write for people like you and me, who are just curious about plants, who like to understand it. So any book in botany today, any flora as it's called, will open its identification part with the understanding of the flower or the fruit. So most books will start with 5 petals, 5 sepals, so many anthers and stamens, whether the ovary is superior or inferior. And similarly with the fruit, how the ovules are placed and whether you cut a transection or a longitudinal section. But if any of us look around us, you will find that it's only if flowers and fruit appear only for a month at the most of the year. The rest of the time, what you see in a forest is just green, no colors. So flower and fruit is so important for identification. Don't get you anywhere. All these big fat books don't get you anywhere. But it's also struck me at that time that living with Adivasi people, how do they get by? Because their life really depends on identification, and correct identification. So I began to understand or try to understand how Adivasi people look at plants, look at forests. And before one starts that, if we could just run through these few slides I have, because these will recur in my talk later. So should we just go through this? So I'll just describe it very quickly. This is a yam. Yam will figure in my talk later. Yams are climbers. We'll go ahead. Yes, please. Should we move ahead? The next one. This is a photograph I had to just show the resilience of yams. I had forgotten a bunch of yams in a plastic bag. And when the time came around the next year, they had all sprouted, no water, just in a plastic bag. So yams are very hardy plants, and they are tubers. Tubers are the part which we use of yams, usually. Yes, please. There's also a yam, and what you see like a fruit is the bulbil. Yams don't have fruit. They have these things called bulbils. I will explain this in more detail. And there are male flowers and female flowers. And again, it is climbing. The only thing you need to see is it is twisting to the left. It's something I'll come back to. Yes, please. Same one. We'll just move ahead. Yeah, this is a fruit, this thing which is up. And so there are male flowers without the fruit, and the female has fruited. And it's pointing up. And this fruit will burst, and there will be seeds inside, just like paper, very thin. Yes, please. This is a very typical forest of central India with a lot of lianas and climbers. And climbers are very important, and none of our forestry programs in India ever bother with climbers. All tree planting programs, whether it's Maharashtra or Telangana, they don't bother with climbers. And climbers are very important for arboreal mammals, which travel across the real highway. Yes, please. There's again a forest scene of central India. Once leaf fall has begun. Leaf fall is a very important part of our forests. It's the time when forests burn, like it is burning now in Shimlipal, but also a lot of life cycle activities are timed with leaf fall and when the forest has leaves. Yes, please. These are fish traps, usually placed in rice fields during the monsoon. And they have barbs which don't allow the fish to swim back. So they come in and remain there. And they're used across central India, made of bamboo, and requires a very specific skill to make it. Yes, please. This is a shot taken from air. It's in Borneo, flying across Borneo, and where we worked on wild foods too, with the nomadic Penan. They're some of the last nomadic people, the true nomadics. And this is a shot of oil palms. So the palm oil industry, which is now also becoming part of India, our government has now declared that we will have 1 million hectares under palm oil by 2030. And this is what palm oil does. This is a shot of Borneo, one of the richest forests in Asia. This is what's happening there. And this is the territory of the Penan, the nomads. Yes, please. These are also in the Indonesian part of Borneo in Kalimantan, and very young children who learn how to fish and steer their own boats in very fast waters. Yes, it tells you everything. Yes, please. This is also in Borneo, where the camera usually proves inadequate when you see the size of trees and the kind of buttresses. So it usually reminds you that machines and technology don't work all the time. This is also in Penan, nomadic country, Hunan and Penan people. People who use the blowpipes. Unlike our longbows, they use blowpipes with small darts. Yes, please. This is a wild banana. It's getting very rare in India, but the heart of this banana is eaten and quite relished. It's just roasted and eaten. And also this is called the heart of the banana, also the stem eaten. And quite common in wild Bornean forests, usually in the degraded patches. It needs a lot of sun. Yes, please. This is yam digging. So this is the long yam you see, and they dig very carefully so that you don't injure the base. And when you finish digging, you tend to close the pit and leave a bit of the growing part. So when you come back next year, you can get back to, you can harvest again. So these are very sensible ways of looking for food. So we'll come back to food when I continue the talk. Yes, please. That was it? Yes. So, this is just a collection of pictures to show the way my talk will go. I'll try to keep time. So when I was looking at plants and seeing the inadequacy of the traditional floras, the botanical books, the main thing was that flower and fruit do not appear through the year. In fact, there are many orchids which just flower for 1 week of the year. So identification using these yardsticks just cannot happen. But then I realized, as I said, that Adivasi people do identify plants. So what I realized was the fundamental difference between Adivasi botany and Linnaean kind of botany, the kind of taxonomy I was schooled in, was that Linnaean botany, I mean modern science in particular, tells us to split things, teaches us to split flower, and then you go into the flower and you see how many petals, how many are the petals fused, are the petals independent of each other. And you go into these parts and whether the leaves have this kind of venation or that kind of venation, and do the veins join up in the end, at the margin of the leaf and so on. But Adivasi botany taught me to look at the tree as a whole. That is, you see, how does the tree itself appear? Not the leaf alone, not the flower alone, which anyway doesn't exist most of the year, but the tree. What is the stance of a tree? How does a tree stand? Is it lax? Is it sort of vibrant? Do the branches, all the branches at a specific angle, like if you see kadam trees or silk cottons, there are very straight branches. And then the twigs are at certain angles on the branches. But these are the details. The Adivasi way of looking at it is the whole. And when you go into the whole, you'll see that the stance is made up of all these particulars. But instead of focusing only on the particular and getting lost there, and often forgetting to put the parts together, that's modern science, you look at the whole. And that way of looking also has a new language. So I began to learn to look at the forest like the Adivasi and also at the same time learn Durva. And Durva is a Dravidian language closely allied to other Dravidian languages, but it's grouped along with two languages, one called Kolami and one called Olari. Very small populations who still speak them today. And when you speak that kind of language and you describe the forest or what you see in that language, I realized that a lot of metaphors are used in describing the forest and describing how the forest functions. And being a monsoon dependent area, central India as a whole, and much of India, a lot of the observations are to do with weather. And it's important to read the meteorological announcements before monsoon, which has almost become a political statement. It will rain, not rain, there will be a drought. These are now very controlled by the meteorological department. But that apart, the kind of metaphors used in describing the forest or natural phenomena. So I'll just tell you a few so you get an idea. Say, one was, I'd asked whether it rained enough this year, and somebody said, it rained enough, but not hard enough to wash away the leaf litter on the trails. or red ant nests are too low, which means that there will be red ant nests on the trees are built too low. So it means there'll be a strong winds through the summer monsoon. Or when you talk about very sunny spells during the course of the monsoon, a sunny spell indicates that it's a good day to hunt monitor lizard. Or when you see these big spiders of the genus Nervalia, those spiders, when they start building their webs, weaving some of the largest orbs in Asia, more than a meter across, when they start weaving these orbs on the trail in the open, then you know that winter's approaching and monsoon is fading. So these are kind of phenomena. But what was very nice about the leaf litter one, which impressed me because I realized how stupid I was, because everybody seemed to understand what it meant. When leaf litter was, they said it did not rain hard enough for the leaf litter to be washed away. And after some thought and asking, I realized they meant that the leaf litter after the summer leaf fall should be washed away to the streams, through the smaller rivulets to the bigger stream. And in the stream bed, we have rocks, stones, and this leaf litter goes and plasters that. And when it plasters these stones, they form little nurseries for the crab to lay eggs and spawn. So a generation of crab, or the next generation of crab, and the regeneration of crab depends on the hardness, the force of the rain for the leaf litter to be washed down. So when they said, oh, it rained well, long enough, enough rain in terms of millimeters, but not hard enough for this to happen. And they had talked about the crab. And I had talked about, or thought about, a measurement. So this kind of a detail is what language, metaphor, these kind of metaphors of describing natural phenomena started to impress me. And that language was not just a vocabulary, but also how one used it to express natural phenomena, and also, and in these cases, linking to natural phenomena. So what is also important, what became important to me was not this relation of causality. This will happen, therefore that will happen. I observe this, it means that. More than that, so I come back to say two more of such observations and predictions. One saying, when mangoes have longer stalks than usual, it means heavy wind. Or when the new sal leaves are bigger than usual, it means hail. These may or may not be true. Maybe it works some years and doesn't work some years. But what was more important to me was that these individual observations, are we observing the length of mango stalks? Are we actually conscious that the sal leaf this year is smaller or larger than last year? Unless somebody is doing a PhD comparing sal leaves or mango stalks, it's not the kind of observations people make about forests. And these kind of observations are part of their business of life. And most science, or my involvement with the scientific world, never threw up such details, such delicate observations, the things which we gather around the village fire to talking about the size of this or that, along with other things about what animals were seen, bird calls, but this kind of day-to-day observation. That brings me to another topic, which is the sort of the main topic. Why and how do we observe the forest so intimately, so closely? what are the activities? What activity? Unless we are doing scientific research, in the modern world, we have very little opportunity to do that. But in the Adivasi world, the business of food collection, the day-to-day business of food collection, of course, a lot of Adivasi people are also cultivating, are also practicing agriculture or different kinds of farming systems. But food collection as a whole is one of the most intimate ways of knowing the forest. So there are three main things I would like to mention. One is fishing. One is gathering, which is mushrooms and leaves and all that. And one is game, hunting small game, trapping, that kind of, say, the hunting side. So we have these three areas of food collection. And in my experience with language, I realized that there are 23 verbs used to describe food collection in Durva, in the Durva language. So these 23 verbs are very ordinary verbs, I mean, verbs used in everyday life. So it could be to wander, to collect, to pick, to cut, to find, to scrape, to break, to chase, to smoke out, to feel, and so on. So these are verbs which are verbs used in everyday language, but when they are used in the hunting context, they take on a different meaning. So for example, when I say I'm going to chase in the hunting context, I immediately mean to somebody who knows, who speaks this language, who understands. And this will be in most indigenous languages, I assume. When I say I go to chase, I mean monkey. I mean giant squirrels. I mean macaques. I mean civets. When I say I go to feel, feel is also as in touch and feel. I mean feel under the rocks for crab and fish. When I say I go to search, it may mean searching for mushrooms in the leaf litter. Or when I say I go to dig, I may go to dig a rat burrow or for snake. So these are the very common ways when I say chasing and jumping and digging and smoking out and all this. These are the most intimate ways of knowing the forest, knowing one's environment. When you get wet, when you put your hand deep into the hole or climb up somewhere or jump somewhere or run and trip. So the kind of ways one began to know the forest, it also brought to me a certain concern that how is this kind of knowledge is going to be passed on to the next generation with shrinking forests, migration of people leaving the forest and tribal people, I mean, the thrust of them being mainstreamed. These were the concerns. So passing down knowledge where these are not things you pass in a kind of school setup. You need the forest itself and traditions to continue. You need access to forest. You need access to this kind of a lifestyle. And so I'll come back to this passing of knowledge thing. I'll pause over here. So I'll pause and explain what yams are because I'm using that example. Yams, for those who don't know, it's a very large genera which has about 600 odd species. Many of them are edible, have edible root crops. Yams, all these 600 species are one genus. It's called Dioscorea. And I can't resist saying that many people, when I say yams, may think of Arbi Colocasia or Zimikand, what is that? That big thing that Zameen Kand, what in Tamil we call Sene. These are not yams. These are called the false yams. The yams are Dioscorias, and it's only one genus of more than 600 species. In India, we must have more than 50. They're very, very difficult to identify precisely, especially the wild yams. All yams are climbers, all of them twine. And I'd asked that you notice that it was twining left, the first slide or second slide. So yams are twiners and they stick to the direction they twine, right twining or left twining. And that's a split. It's the first thing any yam identifier will do, that you split it. So left twining one, so you eliminate the others. Then of course, identifying them is more difficult when you need to dig them, because the harvest time of yams, when you need to dig it, is usually in the dry season, when the yam leaf has wilted and the above ground part has almost faded. Most botanists, because they are so keen on the above ground part, only bother with the leaf and the twining and the stem and whether it has thorns and all that. They hardly ever bother to dig down. And the Adivasi, who's only bothered with the below ground part, because that's what the food is. And it can be stored as long as you want, because you just leave it in the ground, it's stored. You don't need storing space. Adivasi homes have a major problem of storage because the space is limited. So the Adivasis know the below ground part and the botanist knows the above ground part. And I'm still trying to bridge this. So in one of my yam expeditions, I had asked a young schoolboy, a tribal schoolboy, a Durwa boy, who'd been to school, and he'd been to class 10 and he'd left home and lived in hostels and so on, to help me identify them, and he came along with me. And he was very good. I mean, he didn't bother with left twining and right twining. He knew exactly what I was looking for, and I was the one doing the botanical style of identification. And he knew exactly, from very dried, wilted leaves, he would know exactly what the yam was about. So I asked him how he knew it, because he's been to school and he's been away from home. So he said that when he was a very young child, I mean, his mother would carry him on her hip, and when she went looking for yams, and then she would sit him on a rock while she dug. And it was just watching. He thought he was just watching her dig, how she dug and how she left a little bit in the end and covered it up for the next year. And she would talk to him all the time. And every time he went with his mother or aunts and sisters, he watched. He was always put on a rock, put on a nice spot, and he watched. And that's what he was telling me about, that observation and taking in, rather than being taught that this one goes like this is like that. Maybe that came later. But a lot of this knowledge is grasped like that, is grasped. Tradition needs to live to be passed on. And I'm coming towards, and this is something which, so there is a way of identification, there is a specific way of harvest, so that the harvest is not the end of the plant, but assures regeneration. And with yams, for example, a lot of yams are toxic. They need to be prepared. Many wild foods are toxic or have toxic principles which have to be neutralized before we eat them. And these toxic principles protect them in the wild from other predators. And human beings know how to neutralize that and consume them. So there's another field. I'm not going into that. So when I finally understand, or I've taken you through these metaphors and wild foods and understanding of a different kind, what struck out was that the way forests are seen by Adivasi people is that there is a large areas in the forest, large things which they may do and may not do, that there are sacred spaces and profane spaces. Certain actions are good. Good behavior would be, for example, leaving behind a bit of that yam so that it regenerates. Good behavior would be not to harvest a fruit before its seed is mature enough to regenerate, not to take all the raw fruit. To be able to climb a tree to pluck the fruit rather than chop the tree from the base, that's good behavior. So tree climbing itself is part of good behavior. So this is the kind of way I began to understand the forest. And I should now come towards a conclusion, because I will conclude with a couple of things which are of very recent news. The way forests have been protected and understood, and which can be traced back to the kind of Linnaean taxonomy, to the kind of forestry which we practice since colonial times to now. They give us reserve forests, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, protected areas. And what the recent reports, say from the IUCN or FAO, various conservation groups, what they tell us is that despite the increase in protected areas, biodiversity, or the number of species in the world, is decreasing. And we are increasing more and more protected areas. So what is the reason for that? I'm going to leave you, the audience, to the listeners with these questions. It seems that the power of governance of traditional peoples, their own governance systems, are stronger than the kind of rules established by protected areas. Protected areas basically deny access, which means stopping tradition. So this is one thing, the increase in protected areas and the decline in diversity. India itself has increased its protected areas from 500 to more than 800 in the last 15 years. And we haven't increased our biodiversity. The second kind of statistic I'd like to offer you and then close is that of the kind of, this is again an FAO report of 2020, that of the 6,000 species of food and animals cultivated for food, 6,000 species cultivated for food, only 200 contribute to the global food output. And of these 200, 9 occupy 66% of the total crop production by weight. And these 9 include sugarcane, rice, wheat, cassava, potato, soya beans, oil palm, and sugar beet. And we've lost, increasingly losing hundreds and hundreds of food plants, where a common Central Indian village eat between 200 to 400 species of foods through the year. So these are the questions we have for us, and I'd like to stop and thank you for your patience and listening and bearing with me. Thank you.
Madhu, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Madhu, for that sort of insightful presentation, although I did miss bits of it because of my strange internet connection this evening. But maybe I can just, I have a few questions that I've been wanting to ask you in general in relation to your work and also in relation to the presentation just now. And then what we could do is maybe if there are questions from the audience, then we can open it up for that. I know that of whatever I've encountered of your writing and your presentations and your talks and your work, there is even in your autobiography, right, which I have only read sort of snippets of, that you've kept the self away as much as possible, and it is about the observations of daily life in Bastar, in the forests of Bastar, where you did live for 3 decades, and you continued, your engagement with Bastar continues. And I understand and respect this, but I just wanted to kind of delve a bit into also how did you decide to go to Bastar? What prompted you? Can you take us through a bit of the decision and then the arrival? I mean, actually, just hold on. I have actually a quote from your book, Wood, Smoke, and Leaf Cups, and it says, "One summer about 30 years ago, I spread a map of India on the floor of my room, and a large swath of the country in central India was conspicuous for the paucity of roads. Delighted with this discovery, I decided to go." So yes, so tell us a bit more about the decision to go and to immerse yourself eventually.
It's about that. I was very young and didn't think about too much about what to do and plan, but it was much more how to live now. And I still keep reminding myself that one lives once and might as well do what one has to do and where the call is. So this was part of that journey. And I think forest and Adivasi life, I mean, even now, whenever I'm among such people, something wonderful happens. I always dream of a past, a human past, which was far more delightful than what it is now. And I tend to live in that kind of time, of a very, very long past of wood fires and smoke and food and open and outdoors and things like that. Not that I don't like many things which we have today, like good books and being able to read other people's experiences. But this is a driving force, especially certain things of the forest or any space outdoors where, I mean, life seems to be worth living when one is there. You don't need any other purpose. It's there. I don't know if I'm answering.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, to sort of go on a bit with this idea again of life there, which then also, once you arrive there, life there, as you have spoken about it in relation to the idea of deschooling, which is a term that comes up often in relation to your work in Bastar. And I'm interested in sort of the deschooling that you would have, that you undertook, and what this might entail, or what this has entailed, because you call yourself a student still, and anthropology, because you also call yourself a self-taught anthropologist. And I'm wondering if this idea of the self-taught anthropology in itself is sort of, freighted with power relations, right, as a discipline. And I'm wondering, when you call yourself a self-taught anthropologist, is this also something that transpired while you were in Bastar? And in a sense, was this autodidactness of it all was meant to undercut the, sort of the power relations? And how it's a very nested question. I'm wondering if it's making sense. So basically, deschooling, and how does that relate to the idea of anthropology, and then on to this idea of the self-taught anthropologist?
You're very right saying that anthropology is a colonial science and is of a more powerful society looking at societies which they consider inferior.
Exactly, yeah.
And For me, I wanted to do it the other way around, that try to look at my own society, the mainstream educated society, from that side. How I look and how silly I look and how ignorant I am about the forest or whatever. So if I use the same principles of anthropology, which is a self-taught thing, but then turn it around and to look at myself, my family, my friends, my people, my society, that is the practice I try to have and still do, and still reverse the process. And even now, I mean, considering why isn't Europe studied by an Indian anthropologist? Why don't we go and pitch up a tent outside some rich German home and ask them what they eat and whatever we want to ask in anthropology? Why is it they who can allow them to come and do that to us? Mm-hmm. These are questions which have come to me very early. And I followed them in my mind, and I've always chased these ideas. So that's the way I have used anthropology. And in today's time, I mean, studying our own society, unless we can respond to society, whether in writing or art or in practicing, say, using an anthropological eye, it is what makes it most worthwhile. And I think my journey is around that. Also to do with food, what are we eating today and what are the kind of assumptions. Even with the question of wild food, it is now one of the most sexy topics. Everybody's into wild food. FAO has done huge conferences. But what are they doing? Are they understanding certain deeper elements to do with cultures which have offered it so generously to us? But all we are going to do is have eco shops and talk about omega-3 or talk about nutritive principles, but lose completely the context in which such foods have been eaten, practiced. Do we even know, for example, what a balanced diet is? Everybody's talking about a balanced diet. Is it a balance per day, per week, per month, per year? Is every meal to be balanced? I don't know. And everyone I ask, no. Because every meal needs to have some protein and this and that. But is it true? Is it necessary? So these are the kind of questions, even in mainstream knowledge gathering or practices, you can ask. And I don't see these kind of practices followed on the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I ramble off, but
no, this was good. I wanted to sort of we also have a few questions in the chat, but I'm just going to pose one question because it's somehow related to some of the questions in the chat as well. I was interested. I mean, you learned this, the commitment towards the learning of a language is perhaps is one of the most generous, say, acts of love. And so I'm interested in at what point of time did you decide that the learning of the language, Durva, would be critical to your time in Bastar, and how did that change your interaction with the people, the forests? If you can tell us a bit about that, yeah.
I think learning the language was not a conscious effort, but it was more, I would say, a thirst. And I just needed to know it. I just needed to have it. It was just like understanding. I was not schooled in botany. At one point, I realized that if I have to understand a forest Adivasi, I need to know botany. So I found myself a teacher to teach me and to observe and how to observe and what to look. And he was a normal botanist who taught me Linnaean botany. And So it was again a thirst. Botany also was a kind of language, a tool. And Durva language was also a language. So just to make a small off remark here, when I have often been asked to teach plant observation in schools, primary schools. And I noticed that when the children are below 5 or 6, they really observe. And observation is very strong. 6, 7, up to maybe around that age. So they can say, when I stand them in front of a plant, they describe it accurately. The leaf is torn, it's yellowing. They're not trying to pretty it. They will tell me all the wrong things that's happening there, all the right things. It's exactly what they see. But the moment the child is 10, it starts to get muddled up. They start seeing photosynthesis. They start telling me about oxygen. And that's where it fails. And so a kind of knowledge system which comes in, this is the kind of abstract thing which comes and muddles up, and we lose the sense of direct observation. That was an aside, but I wanted to include it somewhere.
Sorry, Madhu, there's a lot of sort of tech mess happening. I'm just trying to retrieve the questions that were sent for you. Just give me like a minute or two. Yeah. I'm in the meantime, while the questions come through, I can also maybe pose another question to you, and it's kind of related to the current moment. And hold on, there we have it. We have one question that's come through. Okay, I'm going to first go ahead with this. Do the people in the forest establish personal relations with the plants and trees apart from possible deification? What other kinds of relationships do they establish?
Would the person like to say it, or shall I just assume I understand?
Shall I repeat the question once more? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. It says, do the people in forests establish personal relations with the plants and trees? I think, I mean, you've kind of answered this through the course of your talk, but and apart from possible deification, what other kinds of relationships do they establish? Maybe because I think you have addressed this somehow in your talk, maybe I can just add to that, because a question I wanted to ask was somehow related. And the question is, in the current moment, for instance, I mean, you have been back there since, you know, things have opened up, the lockdowns, etc. And I'm wondering what place of, what is the relationship between wild foods and nutrition and medicine in a, you know, in a moment such as now? How has this been received by the forest dwelling communities? In the light of, in the presence of COVID, I'm wondering if there are, I mean, I'm trying to understand if there is a relationship within the communities of between wild food as also nutrition and medicine. And does this also sort of become somehow relevant in the current context of the virus? How has the community responded to it in relation to their own food habits?
Yeah, so I'll try and do justice to both questions. One is, in the COVID time, I did find out across all the different tribal people I work with or live with that most of them did well. Most of them were who reached home or who were already home. They were quite well off in the forest. They did not have any food problem. They did go out to eat. They did go and dig whatever they needed. They harvested through the monsoon, they got a whole lot of food. Food availability, wild food availability peaks between May and September. That's the time you get most of the foods. And it happened. And this is also stored for the rest of the year, usually dried or smoked and stored. So this happened. So, and in some places, of course, people do know that certain foods are also improve resistance, or certain foods are good against fevers.
That's right.
That was also taken into consideration. And certain foods are normally taken when you have a fever or a headache or a dizziness. In fact, the certain foods which are taken when you're dizzy, they're also taken when you have a hangover. So after a festival, people go for certain foods like that.
Yeah.
And the other question about deification, more than deification, is more the good behavior. The personal relationship is often to do with regeneration. And there's an anthropological term called first fruit ceremony, which is many plants which are used, not necessarily as food, but could be used to make leaf cups, could be used for fiber. Many plants have a certain time of harvest and a certain time when you stop harvesting. And this is a kind of collective behavior when in the village nobody harvests before a certain time. Usually it deals with its regenerative principle. Leaves used for leaf cups, many are people just stop using it after a certain point, and you will realize that if you continue using it, you will finish off those plants. So good behavior is in that kind of way of regeneration. Other than that, I would think it's more to do with sacred spaces or spaces which are recognized differently. I mean, the kind of modern way in which we divide forest spaces, reserved, biodiversity, hotspot, biosphere reserve. These are the kind of spaces. And in a forest terminology, you may have a fallow, which is a place you leave after a harvest, which in a shifting cultivation plot. Places which are half wild and half domesticated, that is a fallow. Something like a north-facing hill slope will have a different kind of species composition, and which is known. How forests are cleared for cultivation. There is a sensitivity to it. And sacred spaces, sacred groves, which are a lot in Western Ghats also, right along the Western Ghats, very famous sacred groves, big ones, where nobody cuts anything, where even dry wood, fallen wood is not picked. So this is the way of, this is going to deification, but a lot to do with food and regeneration. I hope I answer part of your question at least.
Yes, yes. There are a couple of other questions that maybe from the audience that maybe I can read out to you. The first one is, how does someone in the urban context access these knowledges in the least intrusive / destructive manner? Which actually, I just want to, I don't remember it in its entirety, but there is, I read in one of your writings, there is this Durva saying, right? About something about when, about like depleting the earth wherever you stand, something to that effect. There is.
Wherever you sit is the earth which bears the burden.
Yes. So, I mean, that comes to mind in relation to this question also somehow. How does someone in the urban context access these knowledges in the least intrusive or destructive manner? Is this at all possible to access these knowledges in any context in a sort of non-destructive manner in relation to the peoples living there? Can you tell us a bit about that, about your own experiences also? Yeah.
I find it difficult to answer this one. I don't know if I myself have been an intrusion.
Mm-hmm.
In the early days, in the 70s, my intention was to get lost and not come back.
Mm-hmm.
But as one saw things happening, the kind of clearing, the roads coming closer, the market forces, timber smugglers, everything. And that's when one had to make one's presence felt and take on another kind of role. And now try to use what I know of resistance, of maybe delaying the end. That's all I can think of. I'm quite pessimistic. I don't think I'm going to stop anything. The way that the kind of development forces or whatever they are, they're coming. One delays it, delays the end.
Delays the end of?
I mean, it delays the kind of destruction, you can say. I mean, which dam has ever been stopped? Which coal mine has been stopped? You don't stop it.
Yeah.
You delay it. There's a stay order and things, and then that guy comes with another clause, another offer, So across the world, we see these trends. But coming back to the question, I think such knowledge is extremely important because they might be the only things we have today. These are kind of observations and kind of ways in which the earth has been understood. Their own areas have been understood. Whether it's their little patch of forest or from this little area, they understand the larger questions we have. We have no clue with all the science. We continue as if nothing's happening. Everybody's just waiting for this lockdown to end so they can continue with their travel. So, and the kind of projects which you see in India today, say 8-lane highways, and everybody's very happy, as if that's all we need to save us. But the kind of details which people have, like, please give me a moment. Like,
Yeah, of
when
course.
we have this very big debate on climate change today, which is, I think, very few people are denying it today. But say somebody collecting food, these are the people who observe very microclimatic changes. In small spaces, they observe that certain mushrooms aren't coming this year, or this fish has disappeared. These are the kind of changes which are not recorded. And these are the people who will tell us that. So I feel these knowledges are important and that somehow we can prevent such knowledge disappearing and see if we can encourage how these things can be, their expression at least. I don't know how without intrusion one can access it through other people's writings or other people's experiences. But I feel quite sure that these are the knowledges which might save us in the crisis we face today.
You've kind of touched on this in your answers, but I wanted to maybe just dwell on it a bit more, because I mean, for instance, when I quoted that line from your autobiography about you going there about 3 decades ago, but because there were no roads or the paucity of roads. But of course, even at the time, the incursions into the region had been ongoing, and since that time, the roads have been sort of piling up, as it were, in the region. And the region has been a sort of epicenter of a lot of discontent and a sort of a civil war, one would say. And how how do you read the situation? What is your engagement with the situation in relation to, say, forest rights and people there? I know that there is that, or also something simple as hunting, right? I know that in a text that you had written that I think it was a couple of young men who hunted a deer or something that had entered the village, and then they were taken away by the police, and then there was a sort of a long ongoing ordeal. And this is, of course, just a smaller kind of anecdote, but there is a larger issue ongoing in the region as well. And how did you encounter this in your work and your life there?
Well, Central India has been, in the kind of focused for very different reasons and quite the negative reasons. There's been a lot of violence, and maybe not so bad as in the northeast of our country, but well, violent, making travel difficult. Over the last 10 years, it's been impossible to camp in the forest because both sides mistake you for the other, and then you're in trouble. And of course, there's a lot of security issues, and one had to keep clear and do one's work. So this has been quite a struggle over the last even 20 years, I would say, 15 anyway. And other issues like land rights, which is, we have a major legal tool called the Forest Rights Act. Of course, hardcore conservationists oppose it. There is good and bad in that. It has been politicized. Whether this kind of a law is going to help, but traditional management plans can be made, and there are procedures to do it, and we have been trying to work on that. The other question about hunting and the depletion of wildlife today, these are things which I'm beginning to take seriously now, because it's no longer as abundant as in the past. Most hunts, I don't think people are getting anything back. It's more a form. People do it as they have always done it. And that kind of awareness also is coming among the youth, that they need to hold back. And Adivasi youth are very, very conscious now of what they have, what is at stake.
Right.
Beside the migration and the urbanization, and every time they go out, they want to come back. But on the other hand, in Adivasi villages or in much of rural India, the kind of agricultural policies we have, which are discouraging to continue agriculture. Forest produce, what we call NTF, non-timber forest products. They have a very, they don't have a minimum support price in most cases, very few. And to follow these are very difficult. So it becomes open trade, depletion of many produce. So these are the kind of issues which one has got into addressing or dealing or understanding today. It's a far cry from what I was up to learning botany and language and having a good time about 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's also a far cry from my imagination. Sort of, the imagination, the idyllic imagination of wood smoke, and what that drew you to Bastar to begin with, and how things have transformed since the time you would have arrived. I want to ask one more question, which has come through on the chat. It was lovely to know how language is not just used for its vocabulary, but also links to natural phenomena. Could you give us some more examples like fallen leaves and crab nests?
Yeah, let me just think. When we see ants carrying their eggs, it means rain. Because that's when they go to hide their eggs. They go to their little nests. They go to different places. So whenever you see rows of ants carrying, black ants carrying small white eggs, it's rain. That's something which off my head. I don't know if you know a plant called, it's a climber called Scaphlera in Latin. When it flowers, people start to mend their fences and start plowing. It's going to rain. It's a kind of farmer's thing. Person who does that. There are certain caterpillars which drop a lot of silken thread in the forest. It makes it very annoying to walk through the forest during that time because it again, once those threads reach the ground, rain comes. And these are like unfailing phenomena. These are the kind of things, but I tend to collect them as people speak. Also, when people are talking about these kind of things, about when you find fish, when you find mushroom, certain mushroom then tell you that so much of the monsoon is left. So it comes at a certain time of the monsoon. The monsoon's about 3.5 months. So when this mushroom appears, we know we have 2 more weeks left. They are very specific milestones.
Have you just as a question, have you sort of already or compiled these kind of ways of understanding the forest? Are they already out there in the form of literature, or is this something you're working on, this kind of ongoing, say, vocabulary of the forest or dialogue with the forest?
These are towards what we are trying to teach among our network and to the youth, putting things like this together as preparing a kind of lesson or a course for mainly rural tribal students who are forgetting these things.
Right.
We call it barefoot ecology. It
Okay,
is their ecology. We're giving it back to them.
Right.
I see myself as not owning this. It's their stuff. And even many of the Durva youth are forgetting these kind of things because their preoccupations are different.
That's right.
So it's towards this giving back, I collect.
I think we probably have to conclude on that note because we have run out of time, run over time. Madhu, thanks a lot for joining us this evening, and yes, hopefully this dialogue can continue in different ways in the future as well between us. We are going to the video will go up on our website soon, so that might be a way of engaging people who want to access this this presentation at a later date. Thank you for your time.
I just want to say thank you, Madhu. There are about 6 to 7 people attending with us at the gallery also. It was an incredibly fascinating talk and quite humbling actually. Makes us feel like we know so little of our surroundings. So we hope that we want to spread this session amongst our other viewers and everything, and it will soon be up on our website, as Gitanjali says. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for attending.